The wind howled across the plains of Montana Territory like a vengeful spirit, rattling the windows of the small church where Eliza Everhart stood motionless before her husband's casket. It was 1879, and at 23 years of age, she had become something she never expected to be so young a widow. The funeral had been brief, as frontier burials often were. John Everhart had been a good man, a hard-working rancher who'd succumbed to pneumonia after falling through ice while rescuing a stranded calf. Eliza had nursed him for 2 weeks before he'd slipped away, leaving her alone with a small ranch, dwindling savings, and a future as uncertain as the Montana weather. As the last mourners departed, Eliza accepted their condolences with quiet dignity. Her face remained hidden behind a black veil, a shield between her grief and the prying eyes of Silverdale's residents. The heavy fabric obscured her delicate features, her honey-brown hair, and most importantly, the tears that refused to stop falling. "Mrs. Everhart," Pastor Williams said gently. "Is there someone who can stay with you tonight? Perhaps Mrs. Miller from the general store." "That's kind of you, but I'll manage," Eliza replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "I need to be alone with my thoughts." The ride back to the ranch was solitary and cold. Eliza guided her mare through the familiar trail, the surrounding pines standing sentinel as the February chill penetrated her black mourning clothes. John's absence felt like a physical weight pressing down upon her chest. 4 years of marriage had built a life she thought would last decades longer. The ranch looked different, somehow emptier. The modest 2-bedroom cabin, the barn, the corral, all structures John had built with his own hands. Now they stood as monuments to a future that would never come. Inside the cabin, Eliza removed her bonnet but kept her veil in place, as if removing it would make John's death more real. She stoked the fire and sat in his chair, running her fingers over the worn armrests where his hands had rested countless times. That night she slept in her clothes, too exhausted to change, too heartbroken to care. Morning came with cruel brightness. Eliza rose before dawn, as was her habit, and faced the stark reality of her situation. The ranch wouldn't run itself, and there were livestock depending on her. Grief would have to wait. She changed into her work clothes, but when she glanced in the mirror, she hesitated. Then, with deliberate movements, she pinned the black veil to her everyday bonnet. It would remain her companion, a barrier between herself and a world that no longer included her husband. For 2 months, Eliza maintained the ranch alone. She fed the chickens, milked the cow, and tended to the small herd of cattle John had been so proud of. The work was backbreaking, but she welcomed the exhaustion. It meant sleep might come without dreams of John. Throughout Silverdale, she became known as the Veiled Widow. Children whispered about her when she came to town for supplies. Some said she had been disfigured in an accident. Others claimed the grief had turned her mad. Eliza heard the whispers but didn't care enough to correct them. The veil served her well, keeping people at a distance, until the day Nicholas North rode into town. Nicholas had been driving cattle north from Texas for the better part of 6 months. At 30 years old, he'd seen most of what the frontier had to offer and had the scars to prove it. Tall and broad-shouldered from years of hard work, he had a face weathered by sun and wind, deep-set blue eyes that missed little, and a quiet confidence that came from surviving what would have killed lesser men. He hadn't planned to stay in Silverdale. The small Montana town was supposed to be just another stop on his journey to deliver cattle to a buyer in Helena. But fate had other ideas when his trusted horse, Ranger, pulled up lame just outside of town. "How bad is it?" Nicholas asked the local blacksmith, Sam Wilson, who examined Ranger's hoof with expert hands. "Bad sprain. He'll need at least 3 weeks of rest before he's fit for riding, especially with those mountains ahead," Sam replied, patting the gelding's neck sympathetically. "You planning to wait it out?" Nicholas frowned, calculating the delay. "Don't have much choice. My buyer in Helena isn't expecting the herd for another month, but I can't afford to sit idle for 3 weeks. Might be you could find work around here, Sam suggested, straightening up. Spring's coming and folks always need extra hands for calving season. Any suggestions? Nicholas asked, adjusting his worn Stetson. The Everhart place could use help, Sam said, his expression turning somber. John Everhart passed a couple months back. His widow's been running the place by herself, far as I know. Stubborn as they come, that one. Wears a black veil everywhere she goes. Nicholas raised an eyebrow. A veil? Hasn't shown her face since the funeral, keeps to herself mostly. But her land borders the north pasture where you could keep your herd while Ranger heals. Might be worth asking if she could use an extra pair of hands in exchange. The next morning, Nicholas rode a borrowed horse to the Everhart ranch. The early spring sun warmed his back as he followed Sam's directions, taking in the rolling grasslands dotted with pine and aspen. It was good country, the kind that made a man think about putting down roots. As he approached the ranch, he spotted a slender figure in the corral, working with a young calf. The woman wore a dark dress with a bonnet, and sure enough, a black veil obscured her face completely. Despite this, there was a gracefulness to her movements that caught Nicholas's attention. He dismounted and approached the fence, removing his hat. "Madam," the woman startled, turning quickly toward him. Through the veil, he could just make out the outline of her face, but no features. "Who are you?" Her voice was clear and direct, without the tremor of fear he might have expected from a woman alone. "Nicholas North, madam. I'm driving a herd to Helena, but my horse has gone lame. The blacksmith in town suggested I might speak with you about possibly working here for a few weeks in exchange for grazing rights for my cattle." Eliza studied the stranger. Tall, broad-shouldered, with an honest face and steady eyes, not like some of the drifters who occasionally passed through. Still, she'd learned to be cautious. "How many cattle?" she asked. 40 head. I've got them penned temporarily at the edge of town." Eliza hesitated. The truth was, she needed help. Spring calving had begun, and she was struggling to keep up with everything alone. Her savings were dwindling, and there were repairs needed that she couldn't manage by herself. "I can pay you a fair wage for honest work," she said finally. "And your cattle can graze in the north field, but I should warn you, Mr. North, I run this ranch." "If you can't take orders from a woman, this won't work." Nicholas suppressed a smile. Despite the veil, there was nothing fragile about Eliza Everhart. "I reckon I can manage that, Mrs. Everhart. I've worked for all sorts of bosses in my time," and so began an uneasy partnership. Nicholas moved his herd to the north pasture and took up residence in the small bunkhouse that had once housed John Everhart's occasional ranch hands. Eliza kept her distance, giving instructions each morning before retreating to her own work. For the first week, they worked in parallel rather than together. Nicholas mended fences, helped with calving, and repaired the barn roof that had begun to leak. Eliza continued her daily routines, always with the veil in place, even during the most strenuous tasks. Nicholas found himself increasingly curious about the woman behind the veil. Despite her grief, she worked tirelessly from sunrise to sunset. He observed her gentle way with the animals, her methodical approach to ranch tasks, and her quiet resilience. When she thought herself alone, he sometimes heard her humming old hymns, the sound carrying across the yard like a secret shared with the wind. On the 10th day, a spring storm blew in unexpectedly, bringing driving rain that quickly turned to sleet. Nicholas and Eliza were checking on the pregnant heifers in the east pasture when the sky darkened ominously. "We need to get back," Eliza called over the rising wind, her veil whipping around her face. They rode hard, but the storm moved faster. By the time they reached the barn, they were both soaked through and shivering. Inside, Nicholas quickly lit the lanterns while Eliza removed her sodden gloves. "You're freezing," Nicholas observed, noting how her hands trembled. "We should get you to the house." "I need to check the new calves first," she insisted, her teeth chattering beneath the veil. "I'll check them. You need dry clothes before you catch your death." Eliza stiffened at his choice of words, reminded too vividly of John's final illness. Nicholas immediately regretted his phrasing. "I'm sorry, that was thoughtless of me." Eliza shook her head. "No, you're right. I'll go change and bring back some coffee for us both. This storm isn't passing anytime soon." When she returned 30 minutes later, she wore dry clothes, but the veil remained in place, now affixed to a different bonnet. She carried a thermos of coffee and some biscuits wrapped in a cloth. Nicholas had settled the livestock and was brushing down their horses. He accepted the coffee gratefully, their fingers brushing briefly during the exchange. Even through that minimal contact, he felt how cold her hands remained. "The calves are fine," he reported. Brought the youngest pair into the stall with extra bedding. They sat on hay bales, listening to the storm rage outside. The lantern light cast long shadows across the barn floor. "How long have you been driving cattle?" Eliza asked, breaking their usual pattern of minimal conversation. "About 12 years now. Started when I was 18, working for other outfits. This is my 3rd year with my own herd." "Do you have family somewhere?" Nicholas shook his head. "Parents passed years ago. No siblings, no wife." He hesitated before adding, "What about you? Any family besides your husband?" Eliza's hands tightened around her coffee cup. "My parents are in Boston. They wanted me to return after John died, but..." She trailed off. "But this is your home," Nicholas finished for her. She nodded, the veil shifting slightly with the movement. "Yes. Everything John and I built together is here. I can't just abandon it." "It's a fine ranch," Nicholas said sincerely. "Your husband must have been a hard-working man." "He was." Her voice softened with memory. "We came west right after we married." John had dreams of building something that would last generations. He used to talk about the children who would inherit this land someday. The wistfulness in her voice made Nicholas's heart ache for her. "I'm sorry you lost him." For a long moment, Eliza was silent. Then, so quietly he almost didn't hear it over the rain, she whispered, "Thank you." They finished their coffee in companionable silence, something shifting between them. From that day forward, their work became more collaborative. They began taking meals together in the main house, with Nicholas sitting at John's place at the table while Eliza served food she'd prepared. She still wore the veil, lifting it just enough to eat and drink, careful to keep her face turned away. Nicholas found himself looking forward to their conversations. Eliza was well-read and thoughtful, with opinions on everything from cattle breeding to politics. She told him about growing up in Boston, the daughter of a banker who'd expected her to marry well and live a conventional life. Instead, she'd fallen in love with John Everhart, a young man with Western ambitions, and had chosen adventure over security. In turn, Nicholas shared stories of his years on the trail, cattle drives through storms and drought, encounters with rustlers and wildlife, nights spent under stars so bright they seemed close enough to touch. He found himself editing these tales, softening the harsher realities of trail life for her ears, though he suspected Eliza was tougher than he gave her credit for. 3 weeks passed quickly. Ranger's leg healed well, and the time approached when Nicholas would need to move his herd on to Helena. The thought brought an unexpected hollowness to his chest. One evening, as they finished supper, Nicholas broached the subject. "Ranger's sound again. I should be moving on in the next day or two." Eliza's hand stilled over her plate. Through the veil, he couldn't see her expression, but he noted how her shoulders tensed slightly. "Of course," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "You've been a tremendous help, Mr. North. I don't know how I would have managed this calving season without you." "Nicholas," he corrected gently. "After all these weeks, I think you can call me Nicholas," she nodded. "Nicholas." His name sounded different in her voice, softer somehow. "And I'm Eliza." "Eliza," he repeated, liking the feel of her name on his tongue. That night, Nicholas lay awake in the bunkhouse, listening to the coyotes calling in the distance. The thought of leaving Eliza alone to manage the ranch troubled him. In the weeks he'd been there, he'd grown increasingly concerned about how she would manage the upcoming summer work haying, branding, all the tasks that typically required multiple hands. More than that, he'd grown increasingly drawn to the woman herself. Despite never seeing her face, he found himself captivated by her spirit, her quiet strength, her occasional flashes of humor. He wondered what she looked like beneath the veil, but found it mattered less and less. He knew her character, and that was worth more than any physical beauty. The next morning dawned clear and warm. Nicholas rose early and walked the property, trying to sort through his jumbled thoughts. By the time he returned to the main house for breakfast, he'd made a decision. Eliza was at the stove frying bacon. She turned when he entered, the familiar black veil in place. "Good morning," she greeted him. "Coffee's hot." Nicholas poured himself a cup but remained standing. "Eliza, I've been thinking." She set down her spatula, giving him her full attention. "Yes. I don't have to be in Helena for another 2 weeks. If you're agreeable, I'd like to stay on and help with the spring branding before I go." Through the veil, he couldn't see her expression, but he noted how her breath caught slightly. "That would be very helpful," she said carefully. "But I wouldn't want to delay your business." "It's no delay. In fact, it would give the cattle more time to fatten up on your good grass before the final push to market." It wasn't entirely true he could have made Helena in 4 days of steady driving, but it was plausible enough. "Well then, I accept your offer." Was there relief in her voice? Nicholas thought so, but couldn't be certain. The following days fell into a comfortable rhythm. They worked from sunrise to sunset, bringing in calves for branding, moving cattle to fresh pasture, and preparing for the summer haying season. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and crimson. During one such evening, as purple twilight settled over the land, Eliza broke their companionable silence. "Why did you never settle down, Nicholas? In all your travels, you never found a place that felt like home." Nicholas considered the question, watching a pair of hawks circling lazily overhead. "I suppose I was always looking for something without knowing exactly what it was. Every new horizon promised something the last one didn't deliver. And what were you hoping to find?" He turned to look at her, the veiled figure silhouetted against the fading light. A place that felt right, people who mattered. He hesitated before adding softly, "Connection." Eliza was quiet for a long moment. "And did you find it?" Nicholas held her gaze, even though he couldn't see her eyes through the veil. "I'm beginning to think maybe I have." The weight of his words hung between them. Finally, Eliza stood. "It's getting late. I should turn in." "Eliza," Nicholas called as she reached the door. She paused, her hand on the latch. "Why do you keep wearing the veil, even when we're alone?" She didn't turn around. "Good night, Nicholas." The following day, a telegram arrived from Nicholas's buyer in Helena, asking if he could deliver the cattle earlier than planned. It meant Nicholas would need to leave within 2 days, cutting short his extended stay. When he told Eliza, she received the news with composed dignity. "Of course, business is business." "I'll make sure everything is in order before I go," Nicholas promised, searching for some hint of her feelings behind that impenetrable veil. Their last full day together, they worked side by side, moving the last of the young calves through the branding process. By late afternoon, they were both exhausted but satisfied with the completed task. As they walked back toward the house, Nicholas found himself slowing his steps, trying to prolong these final hours. "I've been thinking," he said carefully. "After I deliver these cattle, I don't have another contract lined up immediately." "Oh," Eliza's voice betrayed nothing. "I could come back, help you through the summer, at least until haying is done." Eliza stopped walking. "Nicholas, I can't ask that of you. You're not asking, I'm offering." She shook her head. "You have your own life, your own path. I won't tie you to this place out of obligation or pity." "Is that what you think this is?" Nicholas asked, frustrated by his inability to see her expression. "Pity. What else would it be?" Nicholas took a step closer. "Maybe I've found something here I wasn't looking for. Someone." Eliza backed away slightly. "You don't even know what I look like." "I know who you are," Nicholas countered. I know you're strong and determined. I know you love this land almost as much as you loved your husband. I know you hum hymns when you think no one's listening, and you talk to the calves when you feed them. Nicholas, don't. Her voice wavered. Don't what? Don't care about you. It's too late for that. Eliza turned away, her shoulders rigid. You should finish packing. You have an early start tomorrow. That night, Nicholas barely slept. He packed his few belongings and prepared for an early departure. By first light, he had Ranger saddled and his cattle ready to move. He walked to the main house one last time, hoping to say a proper goodbye. Eliza was waiting on the porch, still wearing the veil despite the early hour. She handed him a parcel. Some food for the trail. Thank you. He accepted it, their fingers brushing. Eliza, I meant what I said yesterday. She didn't respond directly. You've been very kind, Nicholas. The ranch and I are better for your time here. The formality of her words stung. Nicholas placed his hat on his head, preparing to leave, when Eliza suddenly spoke again. Do you really want to know why I wear the veil? Nicholas nodded, afraid to speak lest he break whatever had prompted this openness. At first, it was grief, she said quietly. I couldn't bear the pitying looks, the whispers about poor young widow Everhart. The veil gave me privacy to mourn. She took a deep breath. But then it became more than that. It became safety. As long as I wore it, I could pretend that nothing had changed, that I was still the same person I was when John was alive. Her voice trembled slightly. I'm afraid that if I remove it, I'll have to face not just the world but myself. Who I am now, alone. Nicholas stepped closer. You don't have to be alone, Eliza. You say that now, but let me see you, he interrupted gently. The real you, not hidden away. For a long moment, Eliza stood motionless. Then, with hands that shook slightly, she reached up and unpinned the veil from her bonnet. Slowly, she lifted the black fabric away from her face. Nicholas felt his breath catch. Her eyes were the color of summer grass, bright green flecked with gold. High cheekbones framed a straight nose dusted with freckles. Her mouth, trembling slightly with vulnerability, was full and expressive. A few strands of honey-brown hair had escaped her bonnet, framing a face that was both delicate and strong. But it was the emotion in her eyes that truly captured him. Fear and hope mingled together, courage in the face of uncertainty. Now you see me, she whispered. Nicholas reached out slowly, giving her time to retreat if she wished, and gently touched her cheek. I've been seeing you all along, Eliza. This just confirms what I already knew. Tears gathered in her eyes. And what is that? That you're the reason horizons don't call to me anymore, that when I look at you, I see my future. A single tear escaped, trailing down her cheek. Nicholas brushed it away with his thumb. I'm still John's widow, she said softly. Yes, and that will always be part of who you are, but you're also Eliza, brave, stubborn, compassionate Eliza who has more life ahead of her than behind her. She closed her eyes briefly, leaning into his touch. When she opened them again, determination had replaced uncertainty. Go to Helena, she said. Complete your business. Nicholas felt his heart sink. And then, Eliza continued, a small smile forming on her lips, come back to me. Not as my hired hand, but as a man returning to a woman who will be waiting for him. If that's truly what you want, joy surged through Nicholas. It is. More than anything, then I'll be here. Gently, with reverence for all she had endured and the courage it took to step forward, Nicholas bent and placed a soft kiss on her lips. It was brief but full of promise. 3 weeks, he murmured. I'll be back in 3 weeks. Eliza nodded, her face now fully visible to the morning sun, to him, to the future stretching before them. I'll be counting the days. Nicholas returned exactly 3 weeks later, driving a wagon loaded with supplies rather than cattle. He had sold his herd in Helena and used the money to purchase items the ranch needed: tools, seed, materials for repairs, and a small gold band that nestled in his pocket. Eliza was working in the garden when she heard the wagon approaching. She straightened, shielding her eyes against the sun, her face unobscured by any veil. When she recognized Nicholas, a radiant smile transformed her features. Nicholas barely brought the wagon to a full stop before jumping down and striding toward her. She met him halfway, and this time when he took her in his arms, there was no hesitation in her response. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching another Montana sunset, Nicholas took her hand. "I've been thinking about what you said about this land being meant for generations." Eliza's eyes softened. "Yes, I'd like to be part of that future if you'll have me, not to replace what you had with John, but to build something new alongside those memories." He withdrew the simple gold band from his pocket. "Eliza Everhart, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Eliza looked at the ring, then at the man, offering it, a man who had seen her at her most vulnerable and had waited patiently for her to find her strength again. A man who understood that love wasn't about erasing the past, but about creating a future that honored it. "Yes," she said, her voice clear and certain. "Yes, I will." They were married in Silverdale's church that autumn, with the aspen trees blazing gold against the blue Montana sky. Eliza wore no veil, her face radiant with a joy she no longer needed to hide. Together, they built upon the foundation John Everhart had started. The ranch prospered under their joint care, and in time, children did indeed come to inherit the land, 2 sons and a daughter who grew up hearing stories about both their father and the brave man who had come before him, whose dreams had made their home possible. On their 5th anniversary, Nicholas gave Eliza a special gift, a journal John had kept during their early years on the ranch, which he had discovered hidden in the barn rafters while making repairs. That night, they read it together, honoring the past that had, through twists of fate neither could have predicted, led them to each other. "Do you ever wonder," Eliza asked as they lay together that night, "what would have happened if Ranger hadn't gone lame that day in Silverdale?" Nicholas pulled her closer, breathing in the scent of her hair. "I think some things are meant to be one way or another, if not then, sometime else, if not there, somewhere else." "You believe that?" "I have to," he said simply. "How else would I have found you behind that veil?" Eliza smiled and kissed him softly. "Perhaps you're right. Perhaps all along you were driving those cattle not just to Helena but to me." In the years that followed, the story of the veiled widow and the cowboy who had gently lifted that veil became something of a legend in Silverdale. People would point to the thriving North Ranch and tell newcomers about the love that had bloomed there, not a replacement for what was lost, but a new chapter built with respect for the one that had ended too soon. And on quiet evenings, when the work was done and the children were asleep, Nicholas and Eliza would often sit on that same porch where they had first begun to see each other clearly. No veils separated them now, just the shared understanding that life's greatest journeys aren't always the ones that take you across physical distances, but the ones that lead you to where and to whom you truly belong.